Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chat and Chew on Elderberry production. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I'm Ludovic Andre and be your host. We'll have a short poll for you in the chat so we can get an idea of the knowledge level of our audience. If you can't find the chat, you can click More or press All H to open it. I'm going to turn it over to Sam for a quick introduction with North Jersey RC&D and RFN, and then we'll get started with our program.
Okay. Thanks, Ludovic. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam with North Jersey RC&D, and I've been the project lead for the Regenerative Farm Network, or RFN. And North Jersey RC&D started RFN a year ago through an equity and cooperative outreach grant from USDA NRCS. Through RFN, members can attend farmer network tours, workshops, and chat and chews, such as today's Elderberry one, hosted by Ludovic. So this is the first one we're starting off with, and if anyone has ideas or would like to lead another chat and chew, please reach out to me. You can learn more at our RFN webpage, or feel free to reach directly out to me. I'll leave the website and my contact info in the chat, and thanks. I'll hand it back over to Ludovic.
Awesome, thank you. Before we start, I would just like to thank North New Jersey, Food Shed Alliance, North Jersey RC&D, of course, Jay Watson, and last but not least, River Hills Harvest for their dedication to spreading the good news and wellness that American Elderberry provides. Based on the questions we received when you signed up for the event, we'll be discussing where elderberries grow, best site conditions, when to plant and growing, harvesting of elderberries, including cuttings, pests, varieties, and processing. Around 12:50 or so, we'll stop for Q&As from the chat. Terry and I will be able to stick around for a bit past 1 if there are still questions. This will be recorded and put on YouTube by the end of the month. Terry Durham. Terry Durham is an elderberry pioneer, growing a 20-acre orchard of elderberry. Terry saw the need for a market, a place for growers to sell their elderberries, and so began River Hills Harvest Products. Known as the Elderberry Man, Terry has a lot to do with Missouri's success in leading the country with over 400 elderberry farms. Convinced of elderberry's value to consumers as well as growers, Terry continues his quest to process elderberries, retaining their highest health properties while having the best tasting farmer-owned small batch products in the market. Welcome, Terry.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I couldn't be happier to be here to work up in New Jersey, up in the area there, to visit with some farmers there. And I'm really looking forward to this opportunity.
Yeah, we made this connection at your conference that you held in June, which was awesome. A lot of information, and I'm glad to push this along and have this conversation here on the East Coast also. What are you doing on your farm nowadays?
Well, besides getting ready for the next conference, it'll be coming up in June again. It'll be the 20th one. Right now, we are making cuttings and getting the cuttings prepared to ship out to the growers all over the country. And so we're starting to go to our fields. We prune those elderberries down close to the ground, and then we take the pieces that are left and we make those into the propagations that we will be shipping out to people over the next couple of months. So that's always an exciting time of year for us. We get to evaluate how the plants are doing, what they're looking like, see how many cuttings we can make, so we'll know how many farmers we can get started growing the next year. So it's an exciting time for us.
You cut them all the way down, or
yeah. We do after the first year. You know, when we started the Elderberry Improvement Project, it was 2 researchers at the University of Missouri, Patrick Byers and Andy Thomas, and I'd worked with them and before that on the organic farming stuff, because I've been an organic farmer for 45 years now. And so we started in discussions about it over some elderberry wine and wondering why there wasn't more elderberries being produced around the country in the United States, because they were all being imported from Europe. There were a lot of different things. They were making this elderberry wine out of a concentrate that was from Europe. So that was kind of the inception of the Elderberry Improvement Project that started in 1997. They got a small grant from the University of Missouri Agroforestry Center, and they began to put a call out all over the Midwest for the best elderberries that the farmers knew were out there in the wild. And they got about 80 different selections from people, and they put those in replicated trials and picked the best 10 then after a few years and put those in more trials against each other. And that's when we started getting the propagation, the material to work with that are some of the best elderberries in the country. And they've been doing great research in the beginning because we knew very, very little about how to really grow elderberries commercially. I'd been going out and picking them since I was a kid with my grandma, and we would make elderberry products, and we even make her same elderberry jelly recipe still. But I had that little history. I knew what they were. I knew they were good. They were a wild and native crop that had never been developed. So
Grandma was on to something with her recipe, huh?
well, real people used to know how to eat and keep themselves healthy in a lot of different ways. They knew how to get out there and forage.
Yeah. So we're in the month of January now. If I have cuttings, when should I plant my elderberries?
Well, you should plant them as soon as you can get the soil ready. And we like to encourage people to prepare their beds in the fall before or early in the winter, because usually when it gets to be spring, there's so much water, it's hard to get the beds ready. So we'll make our fields, get the beds ready, and we put our rows of elderberry about 12 foot apart, at least 12 foot. Some of our growers have gone to 14 feet, some that have done it more narrow, even like at 8 feet, or wishing they hadn't, and they're thinking about taking out every other row. So set your orchard up so that you have the rows at least 12 foot apart, and then we'll put the dormant cuttings in the row about 2 foot apart in the row. So it takes about 1,700 dormant cuttings per acre to plant a nice dense area. We like that. We used to say 4 foot, but what we've learned is that a high density planting helps you get your payback quicker because you have more fruit in that second and third year when you need that income to help pay for your investment. So when you have more stems in the field, you can make you can make more in the beginning of that harvest.
I remember at the conference there was some discussion as to how many nodes. Well, could you briefly talk about what's a node on the cutting,
Well,
and how many nodes deep do you plant?
well, we like to plant just a double noded cutting. Can you pull up that graphic, Sam, for me? And you'll see this picture here. See that cutting there? How we've got it they're opposite budded. The elderberry is opposite budded, and so you want two sprouts, two buds on the bottom, and then two buds at the top. And that way, you put that bottom in and we'll make our cuttings with a 45 on the bottom, so you can always tell where which end's going to go in the ground. And you want to place that so that the bottom set of buds is about 2-3 inches underneath the soil surface, and then you have the other two buds above ground. And that way, it will root out of the bottom ones and make leaves and shoot out of the top. And then eventually it'll make some shoots out of that bottom nodes too. They'll come out of the ground as new shoots. So we have yes, that research you're talking about, they were showing how it really doesn't matter if there are more sets of buds. They usually dies back to those 4 buds that you were showing you there on that cutting. So if you're making your own cuttings, you want to get them sanitized, which you can use. We use ozone water. We love to sanitize the cuttings with ozone, but you can use a dip in peroxide, just regular strength, real quick, and then you put them in vinegar really quick, and then we'll dump them and put them into dormant oil. So you have these 3 dips that you put them into. Now we put the dormant oil on there because of insect problem that people have with the elderberry, which is the elderberry mites, and that will kill the mites so that you don't spread them, or you give them to somebody else. You don't want to give them those insects. So we always treat our cuttings those with dormant oil before we ship them out after we've sanitized them.
Now, are you sanitizing with, are you dipping the whole cutting or just the tip?
We dip the whole cuttings in there, just in bundles. We just fill tubs up. We have a triple sink. We set that up in, and we'll put them in to the sanitizer. We use Sanidate, an organic approved sanitizing agent that we use in there. That's probably a better way to go. This guide here, this info guide, was for more, people that weren't set up to do sanitizing of vegetables and stuff. So that's the simple way of doing it, the homesteader way of doing it. And then you can use an OMRI approved if you're certified organic. You got to use an OMRI approved dormant oil that you put it in, or just any kind of a miticide, which is almost always an oil base, that they're generally not very poison at all. So
I plant my cutting. How long how long before I bear some fruit?
well, you'll plant the cutting. You want to get them in early. So the reason that we try to encourage people to plant their cuttings as early in the season as you can get them in the ground. I've seen people make holes through the frozen soil and stick them in. They're dormant, and we want to plant them when they're dormant into cold soil is best, because that stimulates it to make roots before it sends out leaves. When we started, we were growing everything in greenhouses, and we hadn't really perfected this outside direct planting. And we put them in a greenhouse. The first thing they do is leaf out, because those cuttings have all the leaves and everything are already in those buds. It's too warm for them in a greenhouse, and unless so we like to get them rooted. When we put some in a greenhouse, but we don't put any heat to it. It's more like a hoop house, just to give them some protection, because you want to stimulate the roots first. So you put those in as early as you can. And then the first year, you're just going to take care of it, keep the weeds out of your beds. You can grow them on landscape fabric or use a heavy mulch, or whatever you'd like to do. First year,
What are you doing on the farm? Do you do landscape or do you do mulch? What are you doing on your farm?
we have done landscape and we have done plastic, but we are moving to a system that we can keep a permanent cover crop on and mulch. So it's kind of it's a new way of trying to do it. The problem is you can't address your soil issues if you're using landscape fabric unless you can remove it. So it makes it kind of difficult. It's really easier on weed control, but you can't address the soil health very well. You can't grow cover crops on it. You can't add much more, more compost unless you pull it back, which then it's to be a difficult task if you've just made holes through your plastic. And so we have moved away from, there's too much plastic in the world, and I'm not buying any more plastic to lay down. I used to do that for vegetables, to grow organic vegetables. It was easy. Didn't have, the weed control was down, but then you had to figure out what to do with all that plastic, and it was always a mess. So landscape fabric works good. You can use it for a year or two, but then you really need to take it off so you can address the soil. When we're making our beds, we like to put a lot of compost in there to start with. We'll usually put about 40 cubic yards of good compost on top of our beds before we plant and till that in. So you have a lot of organic matter in there for the elderberries.
Okay, so again, I stick my cutting in the ground. How long before I bear fruit?
Second year, if you take good care of it.
Second year.
Some of our good growers are able to plant first year. They don't cut them down. The second year, they get a good crop, enough to actually pay for the whole establishment of that, if you're doing a good job.
What about what about flowers? Do they start to bud in the first year or second year also?
They will try to flower the first year, but we encourage people to cut those flowers off the first year. Just use them as a flower. Don't let them try to make fruit, because you want to make a good root system, because your elderberry plant's all about the roots. and that association that it has with all the microorganisms and the things in the soil, the protozoa, those are all very, very important. So we're cutting them off after the first year to have more consistent crop toe. So we learned in the research, we learned that if we coppice them to the ground, that synchronizes the growth of the new canes, so that the new canes pretty much come up all at the same time. And a 1-year-old cane of elderberry makes its fruit right on the end of that cane start with. And if they're 1-year-old plant or canes make twice as big of heads as a 2 or 3-year-old plant, if it's a cane, because then they start making shoots out of the axial buds up and down the stalk, which are all, everything's smaller. So the research that they were doing at the university showed us that if we cut them off every year, we would synchronize that blooming and that would help synchronize the fruiting. So we didn't have to harvest it as many times, and it would make the heads twice as big. So that was one of the most important things that we learned, was that pruning method that helps.
And you're finding that to be successful on your farm? Like you're able to
yes.
harvest your berries all within same time span?
Well, within a week, we usually can harvest most of ours. I mean, we have some plants that are more determinate than other plants. And so we started out in the research project, the first one that they released was wildwood. And wildwood's a very indeterminate type of plant. That makes some of them are determinate and some are indeterminate, just like tomatoes. So the indeterminates are going to grow. They're going to make their first big bloom at the end of that primocane. And once they get that set with fruit, it will grow some additional shoots out from the top and bloom again and set some more fruit. And it could do that 3 times. So you have to harvest the indeterminate types more often. We're not able to shrink that into a week. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks to pick all that fruit. So you have to pick it more times. The second one they released, though, was one called Bob Gordon. Bob Gordon is it's still one of our very, very favorites and most productive plants.
So speaking of Bob Gordon, I mean, how many varieties do you have planted on your farm?
Well, we have about 8 different ones that we grow. Here's a picture though of the 5 main ones, and then there are some new ones coming on from the new experiments that are going on right now, the new selection. But we started out with that wildwood, and we really are not growing very much of that wildwood anymore. It's having a few problems with some diseases, and it wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be. But the second one they released, which was a very determinate type, was the Bob Gordon, and it makes really big, nice heads. Their heads average 1/4 pound each.
Nice.
So that's and you're picking the whole umbra when we pick. So 1/4 pound at a time is a pretty good amount. You can fill your buckets up pretty fast. And it has really good chemistry for making wine. The University of Missouri, their wine, they are making some varietal wines out of the different ones. And Bob Gordon has the best chemistry for making wine at this time that they know of. Then the other really determinate one that we work with then is the Ranch. And Ranch is one I picked up from Marge Milliken out in the middle of Kansas from Wildwood Cellars. They were growing in elderberries, and they make elderberry wine. They make a lot of elderberry wine. They were making about 40,000 gallons of elderberry wine and selling that all in Kansas. That was a few years ago. I haven't talked to them. They've kind of changed the business around. And so, but Marge had these to grow, and she had been working with it a little bit, and I really love the Ranch, and it's very determinate, and it's the very earliest one. So we have our Ranch comes on, it blooms first, we harvest it first, and when we're done with the Ranch, then the Bob Gordon will start. So we really like that separation, so we can keep our labor separated. We're concentrating on one, we get done with that, that area, and then we move to the next plot, which would be like a ranch. Then we also
Now,
grow
are
Adam.
there, I have a question though. Are there any, what would you say is the best tasting to you? Or that has a richer flavor? Or would you say they all,
Bob Gordon, I think it has the highest bricks. It is the sweetest one that we grow. We really like it. York is pretty sweet too, but we don't grow very much York. Then we do grow Adams, though. Adams and York both came out of New York, where they were doing research back in the 50s. And York was the last one of the Americans that were released before the new selections were released.
so you
Adams was
said bricks.
released.
I'm just for our users, what is bricks? Could you refresh my
Bricks is
memory also?
that's kind of the sugar content of the berries. A bricks reader just kind of reads the level of sugar in your leaves or your fruit, and it's used to judge the quality of the fruit. Generally, for making wine, you want to hit a certain bricks, or you know, you can tell the health of a plant by having a high. If it's a high bricks, it's usually a healthier plant.
Huh.
So, and that changed. The bricks will go up and down during the season for the leaves, because you can test the leaves also. But mostly you use it for in the wine industry for quality. You know how good the fruit is, if how much sugar it's in it.
But
But
there's like this, there's a common, as you talk about the sugar, there's this, when I tell folks that, I'm a beginner farmer and I plan on starting with a specialty crop of elderberry, the common question I always get is, isn't that poisonous?
well, yeah,
That's something that I get common over here. So could you dispel that a
that's
little bit?
that's one of the big myths with elderberry for sure, because the European type of elderberry is much different than what we grow. We grow the Sambucus canadensis. That's the dark elderberry that's native from the Continental Divide to the East Coast, from Canada all the way to the end of Florida. So on the eastern half of the United States, that's where the canadensis grows. They grow Sambucus nigra in Europe, and it's a different type of elderberry. And it does have a precursor of cyanide in it, like almost all elderberries, other than the American that we know of, have this precursor of cyanide in them. So they have to be processed. They have to be heated and boiled some to get rid of that potential of cyanide in there. And that's why they think that they're poisonous. And we have learned through the research and proven that the American elderberry doesn't have that problem. You can eat them fresh. You don't have to worry about them. They have 100 times less cyanide in them than apples.
Wow.
So people eat apples
So
all
I
the
plan,
time. The seeds have cyanide in them. If you're a whole core eater, you get a little bit of that in there, but I've never really known of anyone that got sick from it.
yeah.
And so it's not really a problem on the American elderberries. So that's an advantage for us, because when you boil elderberries, you're losing the antioxidants. The heat degrades the potential of the product. So we don't have to heat the American elderberries up to that boiling and simmer in it for a long time. That's not required to make it edible and healthy. We can low heat process. We can do them. There's different ways of doing it with a crock pot, different things you can do to keep that heat down low and never take it over 180 degrees, 175 degrees, or you begin to lose a lot of the antioxidants in your product.
so I'm looking at the chat here, Terry, and one of the questions that they're asking, what are the best soil conditions for elderberry to grow?
Well, elderberries they like a well-drained soil. I mean, people, they don't like to grow in the bog. They'll grow on the edge of it where they're out of the water, but the water's down there where they can get to it. They like a well-drained soil. We like to put them on a sandy loam if you have it, with irrigation, and that does really good. But they do need that organic matter in the soil. That's really important. They like a pH of 5.5 to 6.5 or 7 is fine for them. You want to try to make sure you get your pH adjusted so that it'll grow well. And
So I grow up stick my cutting in the ground, 2 years, you know, start to get some fruit. I'm wondering how big um, is my elderberry plant going to grow? You know,
Well,
if
it kind of matters on how well you take care of it and how much you feed it. Just so normally the plants will get about 6 to 8 feet tall. In 1 year, they will grow up from the ground that tall, make fruit, and they'll start doing that usually the second or third year. And
what's the average like on a Bob Gordon? So per plant, I don't know if you have this data, but like per plant, how much? What are you harvesting? Uh,
sometimes it's hard to tell where a plant is because they stool a lot, and they're going to send up new shoots, and so there's a lot of shoots in there, and it depends on how many shoots you have growing. We do more of an acre average than a plant average, so we like to see by the third year that you're getting to 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of fruit. Our best growers will get up around 5,000 pounds. I know online you'll see these spectacular, oh, I got 13,000 pounds per acre, but it was probably a researcher that had a 10-foot long row, and he gave it great care, and then he multiplied that as if he had them all together in a big field, and their recommendations can be kind of high, but realistically 3,000 to 5,000 pounds is a good amount. And we have growers in their second year that will hit that 2,500 pounds, and in the third year they're up to the 3,500 pounds. And
yeah.
because there's some waste. Not every berry is totally filled up with juice and things like that. We can
Just
figure that out in the processing.
just visiting the chat again. A couple other questions. They asked 40 cubic yards of compost over what size area?
That'd be over the top of your 3-foot wide maximum beds that you're putting 12 foot on center. So it's about a 2 or 3 inch layer. We use a side delivery mulch wagon, a Mill Creek or a Landco, and that you pull that down and it puts that compost right on the top of your bed. And so the way we run it, we usually get about 2 or 3 inches across a 3-foot area of bed, and we do the same thing with the mulch.
Hmm.
So that's seems like a lot. That 40 cubic yards is usually about a whole semi-truckload per
Yeah.
acre, but it's hard. You want to start out good and get a lot of compost in your soil for the elderberry because they do love it. They have a really close relationship with the mycorrhizals and the microorganisms in the soil, and they feed those guys with. They're telling me now. I used to say 20% of their carbohydrates they were feeding to the soil, but the researchers are telling me it's more than that. They're figuring out it's up to 40% of the carbon sugars that they're making and collecting from the sun. They're feeding through their roots to the microorganisms and mycorrhizals in the soil. And we have some great pictures of how the mycocelia, the type of mycorrhizals that go into the root, will go into the root about 3 or 4 cells, and they make a little thing called, I think it's called a carbuncle. It's like a teeny mushroom inside the root, and that's where they begin to trade nutrients, and they will bring in all the different minerals and things to the elderberry, and the elderberry will feed it sugars. And it's just very symbiotic relationship. And then there's protozoa also involved in there, and bacteria. There's another researcher that was showing me some pictures of how protozoa will attach themselves to the very end of the root hairs, more or less, and sit there and suck up the sugars and the carbohydrates, the things coming off of the root, until it gets really plump. But they can't move very fast in the soil. A root hair can move fairly fast in the soil compared to microorganisms. And so it will kind of encase it a little bit, and through osmosis suck the juice out of the protozoas and then expel it back into the soil so it can feed it some more sugars, and then it'll get some more juice from it. It's like milking each other. They're like each trading back and forth, which is what's happening down there in the world of the roots and art. It's pretty exciting to see all that. So you want to establish it with really good organic matter in your soil that's got a lot of good life in it. And if you're actually starting plants indoors, we do start a lot of plants indoors and set little plants out in the field. And so we always have people mix into their soil mix that they're going to grow the elderberries into 3 important things. So for each 3 cubic yards of soil mix that you'll be using, we like to put in a pound of azomite, which is a volcanic mineral. It's very, very porous. It's a little chunks. It's got 90 different micronutrients and stuff in it. Very powerful stuff. Then we also like to put in biochar or charcoal. We'll put a pound of biochar or a pound of charcoal also in there. And then some really good compost that we put into that more or less sterile potting soil, because that will inoculate the soil with good microorganisms that can colonize. We put that biochar and the azomite in there because they act like little apartments for the microorganisms. They're both very, very porous, and so they absorb things. When you have good organic soil working, it releases a lot of gases and nitrogen gases and stuff through the composting process. And a lot of times that stuff escapes into the air and you're not really collecting it good. So the carbon and that azomite in the soil act like sponges, and they will absorb those nitrogen types of gases and excess water, and they hold it. And then the little microorganisms and mycorrhizals in the soil will use those as like little habitats in time of soil stress. So those particles will accumulate nutrients and water and then hold them so that they can feed them back out to the microorganisms when they're in stress. And so they'll retreat in there, then the soil gets into the right environment for them again, and then they'll expand and go back out there. So
What cover crops?
Important.
What cover crops are you using, and control problems on your farm? What issues are you seeing, or what issues would a beginning farmer have to look forward to?
Well,
question number 1 is, what cover crops are you using? And second, control problems.
Well, we try to plant a good mix between the rows that will be mowing, which is the mow thing. And we try to get 3 legumes and 3 grasses as our permanent cover between the rows. And then generally you continue to try to add more legumes because they fade out of those systems. On the beds, we've been using a lot of mulch. We have moved to planting some buckwheat. Before we plant, we'll plant cover crop of buckwheat and cut that off and till that in a little bit. White clover will work. We have not done a lot of green manuring in the past on top of the beds at the same time, or cover cropping on the beds at the same time, because it's difficult to terminate it. And we hadn't figured out a good way to terminate that. We're still working on growing an undercover cover crop in the beds. Now, some of our growers have been using white clover, where they'll plant white clover on the tops of the beds and it doesn't interfere with it very much. So there's a lot of experimentation going on that. When you're using heavy mulch, it's kind of hard to get a cover crop in there. So most people are either using some kind of a mulch. We're working on a different undercutter that we can use, can do it more like grapes, but that's still in the plans of working with that.
So what about pruning? Like, when do you prune?
Pruning we do in the dormant, right this time of year. That's when we prune, and we take the prunings and we turn those into our cuttings that we can sell. So you want them to be good and dormant the best you can. They're very vigorous. They root really easy, as long as you don't let them dry out. And so we learned that there's different kinds of pruning. There are the coppicing it every year, which is what we do. You can do it on the ground really tight. And if you do it really tight to the ground, that means that you're going to have your shoots come up from the root mostly, and then from the down and in the bottom of that base instead of like at the top of a short stump, which is good. But the thing is, it stools and it continues to fill more and more plants out in your bed. And when your bed has multiple shoots everywhere, it makes it much harder for weed control. And you can't hoe it as well. So that's where we use the mulch. And so if you keep cutting them on the ground all the time, I've learned through the years that they can get too thick. There are too many stems coming up. So then you have to kind of cut some of the stems out, so it's not a lot of really small plants and you don't get as big a heads. If you cut it up so that your stick has two buds that are above ground, then it's going to come up from those buds mostly. That root will send its energy into those buds, and it will begin to form like a little stump that's maybe just 6 inch tall, but you'll continue to coppice that, and they'll grow those out every year and coppice it off. Then it doesn't stool out as much, and it's easier to control the weeds around it. But those are
Are
kind of
there
the
are
two
there
things.
are there any pests that when you see on your farm you're like, oh no? Or are there pests that you tell your staff and your
There,
workers to watch out for constantly?
there are a few major pests, and I think you're gonna list in the chat. Maybe there's a really good insect and disease guide that the University of Missouri has created for elderberry. It goes through a lot of the different diseases. I guess the main insects that we have to worry about, one is the spotted winged Drosophila. I know that you have that up in New Jersey. It's in the blueberries, the blackberries. It is an invasive from overseas, and it can be a big problem because it will lay on the fruit. And unlike our American fruit flies, this spotted winged Drosophila has little serrated cutting edges on the backs of its legs. So it can cut the fruit open a little bit to deposit its eggs. American fruit flies, they have to have rotten fruit, more or less, or soft enough fruit to be able to penetrate it, easy to lay their eggs. So the spotted wing can lay on your fruit in the field when it's just starting to get ripe, and then it becomes a big mess because you don't want to have those maggots in your fruit when you start to pick it. We have found there's a lot of work. We could do a whole program on those guys, but there's a couple great insecticides that are organic that you can use on it that do a good job of managing it. You have to kind of go back and forth with them. There's some really good guides online about how to do that. We have found that for us, we keep our fields really clean. We don't let berries fall onto the ground. We pick everything that's in there because they have a short cycle. It can get going. If you have let fruit drop on the ground, then it gives them a place to breed, and they can be a big problem. And there's a
So to take
lot
it back,
of work on spotted winged Drosophila on how to control it. You can also do mass trapping. We worked with that also. And that seems to work on smaller scale. If you just have an acre or two, we'll put up to 50 traps. It's the same trap that every state has stuff on Drosophila anymore. And they're just little like a cottage cheese carton. You put some kombucha in there, a little bit of drop of soap, and leave some holes, and they'll be attracted to that. And you can catch a lot of the first ones that come out. You want to be sure to put your traps in the middle of your plant within 12 inches of the ground, because we know that's where they spend 90% of their time, in the middle of your plant where it's shadier and cool, and they like to stay down low about 12 inches. So you put your traps there, 50 per acre, and that works. The other insect that causes quite a bit of problems are Japanese beetles, and they're a little more difficult to get rid of. We spot spray when they first begin to show up a little bit, because when the Japanese beetles first show up, they're more concerned about breeding than eating. And so they'll show up and they'll be on the ends of, they're attracted to the flowers. So that's when they come in. And they'll be on your plant and they'll be kind of congregating at the beginning, and they'll be sitting on the leaf and they'll have their back legs sticking up, and they're just letting pheromones out to attract more and more beetles. And so they all congregate in little colonies, kind of little groups in the very beginning. And if you use that time to spray them, you can keep the population down pretty good.
So
There
what
are
does
traps we've worked with that have worked, but 50-gallon drum traps. You don't want to do that on little orchards, though. You can move them through your field. When we do the big traps in 50-gallon drums, we keep them about 75 feet outside of the field. This was the researchers that were doing this, and they'd put a pheromone and a floral scent. There were 2 scents they put on them, and then we would begin in the middle of the field and do what they call a push-pull, where we will use Surround, which is a white clay powder that they use in, it's an organically approved thing, used in a lot of apple and fruit production. So you begin to spray in the middle of your field, and you slowly work back and forth, forcing the insects out, because they breathe through their skin. And when you spray this thin little mud coat on them, it clogs up the pores and they can't breathe, they can't see, but they can still smell. So they move towards those traps as you spray towards the edges. You drive them out of the field, and that can work good for smaller growers if you have
what does harvesting look like on your farm?
Well,
like
harvesting will be for us, and probably we're up and around New Jersey there too. It
Yeah.
will begin at the end of July or of August and the beginning of September. It kind of depends on how the weather is. It varies a little bit. You can't say, oh, this date. I've seen it change of about 3 to 4 weeks difference of when we would start over the years differently. Keeps getting to be a little bit later, it seems like. So we will start, we go out into the field, we hand harvest, we just cut, break, we actually just by hand, break the umbrils off the plant. You just grab the stem below the fruit head and give it a good little break, and it'll come right off. And put those in 5-gallon buckets. Then we put those into bigger containers in the rows, and then we move those into the processing area. And then we have a
Hand
distillation
harvesting,
machine.
Terry, that's a lot of work.
It is. It takes labor. That's we're working on mechanical harvesters, but they're not there yet. You have to get the plants right. You got to have the right plants to make the harvesters work. But it goes faster than you think. Remember, your average size head's 1/4 pound. So you fill your buckets up pretty fast. It's not like picking strawberries or blueberries or something. And so they fix up, then we move those to a processing area. We make a destemming machine that we designed and quite a few years ago. We've been making it probably for 12 years now. And you load the berries in there, and it's mostly a shaking. It shakes and pulls the berries off the umbrils, and then you collect them into a colander, a big stainless steel colander that we also make that goes with those machines. And then we triple wash them. So you take your berries in the colander and you set it in a sink of sanitized water. And you don't want to have the water, you want to have the water level adjusted so that it doesn't go over the top of your colander. And when you do that, and the debris will float to the top, and your unripe berries will float to the top. The ripe berries go to the bottom. So you skim off everything on the top, and then you move it do that a couple of times. You move it to a second rinse, and you do it, a second sink that's plain water, and then a third sink. And you do that 3 times, and then your berries are ready to freeze.
How long before? So say when you harvest, Like, are you immediately getting them once they're clean and sanitized? I'm assuming you're immediately getting them into your freezer, right? Or are you freezing them? Like,
No,
what's
we never hold berries overnight. We get everything in the freezer. So normally we will harvest all morning until it starts getting really, pretty hot. We usually have a section, an area we've decided this needs to be harvested. And so they'll harvest early in the morning and then we process in the afternoon. So it's where it's cooler, we have shade and fans and stuff. We'll put them through the machine and then we get them in the freezer. So we'd like to go from the field to the freezer the same day. And we try to encourage all the growers to do that because don't last very long if you don't. And then
so?
the
I
frozen.
mean, why? So let's take it a step back again. Why elderberry, Terry? I mean, you're a farmer. You had success growing vegetables. Why elderberry? What clicked for you?
Well, I was tired of picking green beans. You got to bend over to pick most vegetables. Your back wears out. It's hard to capitalize and get the equipment to make things efficient unless you have a lot of a certain kind of vegetable. Or if you want to grow acres of green beans, you can buy a harvester. You want to buy, to make it efficient. It takes the back-breaking part of the labor out of there, which is great when you're young, but when you get older, it's more of a challenge to do that stuff. So elderberry, it's kind of easier to pick. It's tall, but mostly we grew vegetables. I mean, we did wholesale organic vegetables in the 80s, and in the 90s we started doing CSA. We did that up to about 2001. We had seen how our soil had changed. We were tilling too much. We didn't understand, 40 years ago how much tillage was affecting the quality. We thought, oh, we can always add more organic matter. We can do all this other stuff. But when you're tilling for vegetables all the time, it's hard on the soil. So we wanted to move away from that. I always loved perennials. And so that's when we took the fields all out from vegetables and we just started growing the elderberries. And I wanted to just do one or two things because I was growing 200 different vegetables and stuff for my CSA. And it was pretty large. We still had to wholesale and run like crazy. I wanted to grow one thing. I could figure out how to grow it efficiently, capitalized all the parts for that particular one. And I had faith that the elderberry was going to go somewhere. I mean, I used it and worked with it, and with the new research that they were doing was going to help be able to promote this and turn it into a whole business. So we like to, we grow it, we get it frozen, and then we like to put it into a product because we, as small farmers, we need to add as much value to our products as we can and get it stabilized. Because having stabilized products to sell, you can sell them all year long. You don't have to get your tomatoes sold that day at the farmer's market or throw them away. So with
And
vegetables,
what I liked when I attended the conference also was how you championed the small farmer and growing the elderberry and keeping it out of the hands of big corporations.
yeah, from the very beginning of my career, I was always about the small farmer and trying to help small farmers and all the stuff we did. And but you're still competing with the big guys all the time. And so with the elderberry, since it was a new crop, there was nobody growing it. And we could envision how the farmers could control this for a while. We hope we still are. We could be the growers, we could learn to process it, we could organize it. And it's a community scale thing that's easily done. So our vision is to have every community out there with elderberry growers and makers producing medicine for their community so that it's local and sustainable. And it can't just be taken away real easy. It builds resilience in our communities to also be growing our medicines as well as our foods. So we wanted every community to have people making their own medicines with elderberry and keeping them healthy.
Yeah, so we're about at the 12:50 mark. I want to, you know, go back to the chat, Terry, and see what's going on in the chat, and have you answer some questions that are in the chat. Uh, so here's one. Do other growers dry berries, or do you find that most growers are freezing their berries? Like, what do you find as a
Most
factor?
growers are freezing their berries because most dryers aren't big enough to hold their crop. So what we have done, we work with people that are specializing in those areas. You know, if you have a big dryer and you've spent $40,000 to get a dryer big enough to actually do things on a scale where you can make money on it, it's hard to keep it busy. So supporting the small processors that can use your stuff are also important. The dried berries are our #2 seller. They sell really easy, but they're the least profitable of the things that we grow, because that's what most people are using, but they import them from Europe, which has some pretty poor quality, cheap berries that they're shipping out. We do
What
freeze drying berries are a good way, but it's hard to get your whole crop in there at one time. There are some people in more really arid places that are working with trying to do solar drying on a bigger scale. I've not gotten too involved in that. We work with a lady we can put 1,000 pounds at a time in her dryer. That's a level that you can actually do it to make it economically feasible.
So
And
another question is shelf stability. What shelf stable products, they're asking, do you produce?
well, we make a lot. All of our products are shelf stable that we sell.
And
We sell.
what's the average on the stability?
We on our juice products, we have a 3-year shelf life. When we were doing that test through when you have to get all that stuff tested for the FDA to please them, they do a microbiology test where they have petri dishes and they inoculate them they have different kinds of bacteria in them, and you put your food in there and they see what happens. And our juice actually killed all the microorganisms that were in the petri dish, and they've said they've never seen a food that would do that before. It's super stable. So they said we could put a 3-year shelf life on there. And you remember, those are just suggested. It's still good for even longer than that. We know that it degrades a little after 3 years, a little bit, but it still has a lot of potency. We like that long shelf life of those. We do the pure juice, which is our best seller. Most people will make syrups. They're much easier to make a syrup out of elderberry than it is to do the pure juice, and people like the sweetness of them more. And the dried berries that we'd make a product that uses honey to there's some pictures of some of our products of their juice bottle. That takes about 1 pound of berries to make a bottle of that juice. And
1 pound of berries to make.
you can see, so we come out of it, we're getting a retail value of $20.99 to $23.99, depending on which product. Then we make a honey sweetened juice. That's our cordial. We make a syrup with sugar, but we really like that. We like to use honey instead of sugar. We don't know that sugar is the best health product. Then we do the dried berries. These all are very stable. And we make a jelly. We make elderberry lemonade, and then we do the elder flowers. That's the one thing about elderberry. There's also the flowers that you can work with. They're very popular in Europe. Half of the crop goes to flowers, still being developed here more. We use fresh frozen flowers to work with instead of the dried flowers. And then we freeze dried the flowers also. We make teas. The Elderberry and Friends tea we make is made with the freeze-dried berries and the freeze-dried flowers and all herbs that are local and native to where we live that can be grown. We do
And I remember too at the
salves.
conference, there was some you had a presenter talking about the potential for the cosmetic industry with the flowers too. So
Right.
there's
Yes.
a lot of research being done around that also. I have another question from the chat. They want to know about deer. Deer, they love elderberry. What are you doing to protect your crop?
We use
Probably fencing. I'm assuming.
6 foot tall fencing. You've got to protect it from the deer. I mean, they really are a mess. They may not eat it in the beginning, but once it starts getting fruit and they get a taste for it, then they're in there a lot. So part of our whole teaching for new growers is it's important to mitigate all the risk you can when you're starting. You want to have your fence put up before you plant the elderberries. You want to have your fertility level and your beds made before you start. You want to get your irrigation set and have that running before you start. I've seen too much failure where people go out and they get stuff planted, but they don't have a deer fence up and they start losing it, or they don't have their irrigation ready for 3 weeks after they planted. They got the irrigation on, but it was too late. They had dried out, and they can lose massive numbers of plants like that. So it needs its moisture in the beginning, especially.
Well, what do you think is helping your state in Missouri, thrive with this specialty crop? And do you think do you think this can be replicated?
Well, it can definitely be replicated. I mean, we started out in Missouri. The research was there. And I was there being the farmer supporter from the beginning of the research, and we worked with Missouri farmers first. That's why we have the most there. Right now, about 50% of the berries that are used domestically of the canadensis are coming from Missouri. We have about half the production, but that's really
Over 50% of
growing
American
faster, huh?
elderberry is coming out of Missouri.
Yeah, about half of it, but it's growing fast. We have great growers in Illinois and Iowa. The co-op, there is a
Soon to be New
Midwest
Jersey.
co-op, and that's in Minnesota. There's lots of information on there. We keep lots of science on there if anybody wants to get into that.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Here's another one from the chat. They're asking about transplanting. They have a 3 to 4 year plant that needs to be transplanted. They're looking for any recommendations.
Well, just dig up best you can and move it, and it'll be great. You can cut the top off before you do it and then propagate the top part. Any little piece of root that's not with the root ball, you can take it and plant it also. It's very vigorous. You can grow it a lot of different ways.
Awesome. I think we're coming close to that time, Terry.
Yeah, and
Respectful of your time.
there was so much we didn't get to cover. This is just such a little brief thing. I really hope you set up some workshops and I can come out to your area and we can do a little more intensive thing, a whole day workshop where we can get down and dirty on some of this stuff. Our website has lots of great information on it. The Midwest Elderberry Cooperative has lots of great information on it also. So there are lots of resources. You can email me at info@riverhillsharvest.com, and me or my team will help you out with any kind of questions or problems you have.
Yeah, you're definitely quick to respond. I was surprised to see that, knowing how busy you are. So that's not to be taken for granted. I want to thank you again, Terry, for taking the time out, to speak to us about elderberries, American elderberry. Want to make sure we, make that difference, and look forward to working with you some more in the future. As you said, maybe this turns into a conference of some sort and get you into New Jersey, get you out here.
That or an all-day workshop is even better to give you a lot more information. You can make people dangerous in an hour. It's really hard to educate them. So thank you so much for putting this together, and just keep growing.
Definitely. Well, thank you again. Thank you, North Jersey RC&D, for making this possible also. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Take care.